Growing up in Sydney's working-class suburbs of Redfern and Waterloo was a tough place to learn about life. But for singer-songwriter Perry Keys, it was also a place rich in characters and stories, all inspiration for his latest CD to be released tomorrow, called Johnny Ray's Downtown. One of the tracks of the album looks at life through the history of this city's most famous boxing venue, the old Sydney Stadium. Sharon O'Neill got a preview this week.
The black and white summer Friday night at the fights, Capstan black cats in the park, the New South Head tucked behind the lights, 45 rows back in the dark. Jack Johnson broke the white man's heart, where Buddy Holly played a Stratocaster.
It was Boxing Day, 1908, and the Sydney Stadium at Rushcutters Bay opened its doors for the first time for the world heavyweight title between Australia's Tommy Burns and African-American Jack Johnson.
Well, it was the first time a black man had won the heavyweight championship, and also it was the first event ever at the old Sydney Stadium. It was built specifically for that event. And of course, the stadium became this great sort of focal point, especially of the old working class. The idea of a black man achieving something like that obviously was a big deal in its time, but also growing up in Redfern, the black community there has always been a big part of the way I've seen the world. I remember a guy who used to take care of young fighters, and you'd have young black guys living at his house, preparing for their first fight in the city, and, you know, beautiful young men, and 2 weeks later you'd see them walking around, they looked like they'd been hit by a truck. All those country black fellas never had a chance in that shiny, shiny town. They just kept falling down. I use it mostly as a metaphor. Boxing's always been great for that sort of thing, and I grew up in a place that was a really rough place to grow up. It was a very volatile place to be if you were 15 or 16 or 17, and I wanted to use boxing as a metaphor, which is a thing where young men basically beat each other up. And also the song is set in the old city of Sydney, the old part that you really can't find anymore, and that people don't really recognise it all. It's changed so much, but I always wanted to write songs about that part of Sydney, the bit that sits beneath the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge and the whole idea of the Emerald City. He just kept falling down.
Perry's albums are important because, just like Ruth Park captured the 30s of Surrey Hills, Perry's trying to capture the Redfern and the Waterloo of his childhood and up to now, and no one else has done it as well as Perry has. There's some really touching stories and very moving songs.
And fair weather towns can be the loneliest towns. Just keep your cold hands tucked inside your tracksuit pants. All the wharfies cried like babies when Les Darcy come back home fast asleep. Well, Les Darcy's almost like the ultimate example of a young man who had it all and then had the rug pulled out from under him, mostly just by circumstance, and circumstances beyond his control.
Les Darcy was one of Australia's biggest legends in the boxing world. In 1915, he was the main drawcard at the Sydney Stadium. He was only 21 when he died.
And he was under pressure to go and fight in the First World War. And tragically, these circumstances, it just conspired and was his undoing in the end. He's kind of been forgotten now. It was sort of him, Farlap and Don Bradman for probably the first 2/3 of the 20th century. And Les Darcy has kind of been forgotten now, but when they brought him back, they lined the streets of Sydney, and it was a huge thing. They had never seen anything like it, especially as he was painted as some sort of coward in the mainstream press. But it was almost as if the population of Sydney knew better. But on a very last night of his very last fight, Hitman Harding buckled to the taste as Jack's ghost takes flight from that block tonight with Tommy's belt wrapped tight around his waist. And I think one of the things that a songwriter can do is just show the way other people live, to walk in another man's shoes for a little while, to transport people into an environment that they normally wouldn't really know about or want to be a part of. He just kept falling. I like to sort of switch between the past and the now, and that's what this song does. It covers about 100 years in 4 minutes. And yeah, it for the most part, though, was metaphoric.